and in today's video, I'm going to be going over how to draw more realistically while using color. I'm going to show you a bunch of different materials and show you what happens when you combine colors using those materials. That way you can figure out which ones you want to experiment with and which ones maybe you're not too excited about. Let's go ahead and look at those materials now. Now, before we talk about how to draw realistically with color and how to draw a colorful still life, we need to talk about the colors themselves. So our three primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. And from these three colors, we can create any color by combining them in certain ways. So first we have our red. Second is yellow. And third is blue. Now, if I combine both of these, half and half, I'll end up getting my secondary colors. So, if I end up adding blue to my red, I'll end up getting purple. If I add red to my yellow, I'll end up getting orange. And if I add yellow to my blue, I'll end up getting green. So these are now our three secondary colors: purple, orange, and green. Now, when we talk about making colors lighter and darker, we're talking about tints and shades. So a shade is actually adding black to a color. So I'll color some blue. And then I'll add black to make it darker. If I want it to be a very dark blue, I'll add a lot of black. If I want it to be kind of a medium dark blue, or just have a little bit more darkness, then I will add less black. So these are different shades of blue. Now, I'll color some more blue. If I want to make the blue lighter, or create a tint, I add white. So the more white I add, the lighter the blue gets. These are now tints of blue. So for these examples, I was actually using oil pastels, which is why you can see that they blended together pretty easily. Now I'm going to show you what the colors look like when you combine the same colors but with different materials. So first, I'll be using colored pencils. So again, when we add red and yellow, we create orange. When we add blue and red, we create purple. And then when we add yellow and blue, we create green. Now let's see what it looks like with crayons. Next, I'm going to show you what it looks like when you combine soft pastels. And last, I'll show you what it looks like when you combine those colors using markers. So now that I've shown you how to combine our primary colors together to create secondary colors and how to create tints and shades, as well as a bunch of different kinds of materials, you can decide which of these materials you like to use most. You might like how soft pastels combine together really easily, or how markers really cover each other up when you overlap them. But either way, you want to pick your favorite supply or a supply that you want to experiment with as we begin our colorful still life. Now, when you begin your still life, you need something to reference. So you can use a picture that you print out, something from a magazine, a picture that you took on your phone, or you can even set up a still life right in front of you. You'll need some white paper. I'm using a sketchbook with drawing paper, but copier paper or watercolor paper will be just fine. An eraser, a pencil, and then whatever material you're going to use to fill it in. So I'm using my oil pastels. Now, when you start a still life, you want to look at each of these objects and break it down into basic shapes. So the pear, for instance, would be a big circle and a small circle. The pail or the pitcher would be a rectangle and then maybe a triangle. And then the grapes would all be circles. So I'm going to draw these objects as shapes first in order to help me get the right sizing for them. Make sure that you're drawing very lightly with your pencil. That way, any mistakes you might make are easy to erase. Now, once you've drawn everything as basic shapes, you can go back in with your pencil and re-outline those objects to make them look more realistic. So for instance, with the pear, I'm adding some curved lines around the edges. For the milk handle, I'll make that a little bit more detailed. For the pail, I know that the top of it actually has a little bit more of a curve to it. Obviously, it's not just a triangle sticking up there. And I can fix the shape of the pail a little bit more. And the grapes are probably fine how they are. So next I'm going to just erase any excess lines, as well as I'm going to just make the drawing overall a little bit lighter. This will just help me for when I add my shading with my colors. That way the pencil lines aren't blending with any of my colors. Alright, so now we're ready for color. So when I look at this picture, I'm going to pay attention to the main colors that I see, and I'm not including the background in this. So for the pear, there's obviously a lot of green and some yellow. So I'll go ahead and grab some green and yellow oil pastels. I'll also probably want to add a little bit of brown, white, and black. These will be helpful when I start to add my tints and shades. Now the milk pail is obviously white, but you can see that it has a little bit of a warm hue to it, so I'll be using some yellow and maybe even a little bit of orange for that. And then the grapes, they're obviously a reddish tone. So I'll have my red, and then I'll probably be mixing some brown and a little bit of black to them to add those shades. So let's go ahead and get started with the pear. So the trick when you're working with color is to start with your lighter areas first, because it's a lot easier to make something darker than it is to make something lighter. So I'm actually going to be starting with a little bit of white in my lightest highlights, just so that way I can make sure that I have those super light areas mapped in. So you can see that the lighter areas are right towards the top of the pear. So I'm just adding an overall layer of white to these lighter spots. All right, now I'm gonna go in with my yellow and blend the yellow into the white. And oil pastels work really nicely for blending. I'm also going to add more yellow going further down the pear to help with some layering of those colors. Next, I'll work in my green. And I'm going to fill in the rest of the pear with the green. Even though I can see that it's mostly in shadow, this will just help to add another layer to the shadow. Okay, so I've got my pear basically mapped out, so now I can start to really blend those colors together. So for the highlights, I'll go back in with my white and rub the white into the yellow and the green. And this will help just to soften those lines and help them blend together a little bit more. And the cool thing about oil pastels is you can really layer a whole bunch until you're totally happy with the outcome. So now I'll go in with my brown for my darker shadows. And again, I can use my green oil pastel to blend those colors. That way it's not just a line of brown on there. And you'll find that you'll get different textures for your still life depending on what material you use. So marker, for instance, is going to be very smooth, but it also will get dark very quickly. Colored pencil will give you lots of variety, but it's definitely a lot more detailed and more time consuming. And so last part of my shade is just to add a little bit of black. I don't need that much at all, and the black is really just to help out with the darkest areas. Now once you've got your basics done, you can go ahead and work with all your colors of that object to really perfect how it looks. So these same things are going to apply with the grapes. So what I'm going to do is, again, add my highlights to the grapes first. That way I can make sure it blends with the rest of the colors. And then I'll work my darker colors into it. Now you'll notice that the oil pastels get a little bit messy, but that's also part of the fun of using them. So you can see that when I'm using the red, it's definitely more red than what you see in the picture, but I will go ahead and be blending some brown, and maybe even some blue into it to get a slightly more purple shade. So you can see that my grapes are a lot more red than I would like them to be. So again, this is where the shades will come in handy. I'll use brown versus using black, because black will actually make them a little bit too dark. So by using the brown and then a little bit of blue, it'll actually help me to create that more maroon tone that I'm looking for. So before you start adding black to create shadows, really look at the object that you're shading and think about, does it actually need black, or can I use another color first? Chances are you can use a different color to help you achieve the right look. All right, last we have our milk pail. So I'm going to cover the whole thing in white. And yes, there are some streaks of other colors. That's just how it is when you work with oil pastel. That's one of the things that makes it fun, but also challenging. So make sure that you practice with it first before you go off and do a big, crazy detailed drawing. The good thing is that these colorful streaks will actually help me with my shading. All right, so I've colored the whole thing white. Now you'll see in my darkest areas, the shadow is not black and it's not gray, so I'm definitely not going to be using black. It is actually kind of a brownish color, which is reflecting the colors of the grapes. So I'm going to use my brown and then even maybe a little bit of red for the shadowing in this area. And of course, I'll use my white to help blend. Now, because I have the pear right next to the pail, I'm also going to add just a little bit of green to show that that color is reflecting onto the pail as well. Because when you're working with color, you have to think about how the color is reflecting onto the objects that you're drawing. Black and white, all you have to worry about is the shadows and the highlights. But color adds in another level to that. And I'm just going to add a little bit of yellow into this, since there is sort of a warm light on everything. Go ahead and work your way through your still life until you're happy with how it looks. Adding white for the tints and then any darker colors for the shades. And here's my finished still life using my oil pastels. So with the oil pastels, you can see it's a lot looser, it's a little bit messier.
and figurative. It's a little less realistic, but that is one of the cool things about using that material specifically. If you wanted it to be a little bit more detailed like this, then I would recommend using colored pencils. But feel free to experiment with each material and find out what you like to use as well as what style you like to draw in.
All right, everyone, thanks for joining me today. I hope you found some helpful tips and techniques with how to draw more realistically using color. See you next time.